You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have covered some bad days for Donald Trump in court where he's lost maybe a case, maybe two cases. He's never had a day like the one he just had. Can you explain what just happened to Trump in court?
Yeah, Brian, I have to admit, I love the headlines that read something like, within hours, Donald Trump is a quadruple loser in court. He lost in 4 significant legal cases. And with apologies to the viewers, he did so much losing in these cases. I'm going to have to refer to my notes because I don't want to miss any of his losses. The first case is a case in which a federal judge blocked Trump's efforts to dismantle the Job Corps. Now, this hasn't hit the news all that much. And for anybody who's unfamiliar with what Job Corps is, it is the largest U.S. job training program for who? Low-income youth. So, of course, why wouldn't Donald Trump want to kill that kind of a training program designed to help low-income youth? Well, a federal court judge put a stop to it, blocked his attempts to dismantle Job Corps. 2, an appeals court affirmed the ruling from a trial court blocking the dismantling of the Department of Education. And that same appeals court, the First Circuit Court of Appeals, upheld the trial court ruling that the Trump administration must rehire 1,300 DOE, Department of Education employees that they wrongfully terminated. So what does it prove? It proves that Donald Trump is losing in trial courts and he's losing in courts of appeals. That's the second loss within hours. The third was right here in my backyard, Washington, D.C., where the chief of federal district court in D.C., Judge Jeb Boasberg, ruled that the 140 Venezuelan migrants that the Trump administration unlawfully, unconstitutionally deported to that dangerous prison in El Salvador, they all must be given their due process rights because those deportations were illegal. And what the judge said was, I'm going to give the Trump administration 1 week to come back to me and tell me how they're going to accomplish giving all of those 140 wrongfully deported immigrants their rights. Now, he stopped short of ordering that they all be returned. He ordered that they must have their due process rights satisfied, and there are a number of ways that the administration might be able to accomplish that. That's the third big loss. And the fourth loss involves a firebombing out in Boulder, Colorado. You may have seen the reporting about somebody named Mohammed Sabri Soleiman, who is an Egyptian national who is charged with, accused of firebombing a pro-Israeli demonstration in Boulder, which is horrific, right? That is somebody who should be held accountable. He needs to be given his due process rights, his right to an indictment, his right to a trial. But here's what the Trump administration did. They took all 5 members of this gentleman, Soleiman's family, into custody, and not a single one of them are charged with a crime, including a 4-year-old child of the suspect. Well, a judge intervened and blocked the deportation of Soleiman's entire family without complying with their constitutional rights, due process, and otherwise, because it looked like the Trump administration just intended to whisk them all away, by violating their due process rights. So that is the fourth case within hours on the same day that Donald Trump lost. I mean, this man is the biggest legal loser our nation has perhaps ever seen.
Glenn, how unorthodox is this? Because the way we've spoken in the past is that the DOJ doesn't bring cases unless they are virtually assured to win them. And prior to this administration, the DOJ had something like a 98 or 99% win ratio because the cases that they brought, the cases that they put their resources toward, were all such home runs. And in fact, they wouldn't take cases that they had some chance of losing because they had established this precedent of only wanting to expend resources where they were virtually guaranteed victory. And so now we have reporting that something like 96% of the cases the DOJ takes on in court, they're losing. So they go from a 98% win ratio to a 96% loss ratio. How unusual is that from someone like, in your vantage, where you worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., and were part of this organization that would see so many wins?
Brian, a lot to unpack there, but let me not bury the lead. Let me directly answer your question. What does it say that the Department of Justice, which endlessly boasts and brags about having a 99% conviction rate, is now losing in court 96% of the time? It says two things. One, it says that Donald Trump is engaged in lawless and unconstitutional conduct 96% of the time, at least as measured by the court challenges that are being brought of his executive orders, for example. And two, the DOJ lawyers that Donald Trump is scraping off the bottom of somebody's shoe and throwing into court are not the best, they're not the brightest, and they're not the most ethical, because they're doing Donald Trump's dirty bidding. Brian, they're going into court and they are making unsupportable arguments that Donald Trump's unlawful conduct is actually lawful, that Donald Trump's unconstitutional conduct is actually constitutional. So I don't want to blame it all on these third-rate lawyers, with apologies to actual third-rate lawyers, but that's part of it. The lion's share of it is Donald Trump is acting unlawfully 96% of the time. But I do want to unpack something else in fairness, because I lived for decades inside the Department of Justice, my professional home, listening to people prattle on about their 99% conviction rate. First of all, that is not a badge of honor, it's a badge of shame, because that means the DOJ lawyers are not taking the difficult but righteous cases. They're only taking the sure things to trial. But even more fundamentally, when DOJ brags about a 99% conviction rate, that's in criminal cases. Everything that's been going on in, Donald Trump's world, with all of his abuse, all of his overreach, all of his illegality, that's in civil cases. So I don't want to mix criminal case apples and civil case oranges, because what I don't think DOJ can legitimately claim is they win 96% of the civil cases. They're talking about criminal cases. Still, what I can promise you is that in civil cases as well as criminal cases, DOJ wins in the overwhelming majority of the cases they either choose to bring or the cases that they defend against when somebody sues the federal government. So this is an enormous badge of shame, dishonor, and it is evidence of illegality and unconstitutionality that Donald Trump is losing in court 96% of the time. And he had, and mind you, that statistic was reported out by Mark Elias's Democracy Docket, and it was based on a statistical analysis by a Stanford political science professor. So you can take all of this information to the bank. But Brian, perhaps one of the most important footnotes to that 96% losing streak by Donald Trump is those losses are being delivered to Donald Trump by Democrat-appointed judges, by Republican-appointed judges, and by lots and lots of Trump-appointed judges. These are not lunatic judges. They're not radical left-wing judges. They're judges who are applying the facts, the law, and the Constitution to Donald Trump's conduct and concluding he's acting lawlessly.
Glenn, I want to bring up one specific case that you mentioned in the very beginning, and that was that Donald Trump lost the appeal in his effort to dismantle the Department of Education. So he had lost in a trial court, he lost in the appeals court. Does that mean the next step we're going to see in terms of his effort to dismantle this federal agency is going to be the Supreme Court weighing in?
100%, because I don't think anybody would lay even a $1 bet on Donald Trump accepting losing in the trial court, losing in an appeals court, but not trying to push that case up to the Supreme Court. So 100%, he's going to try to get the Supreme Court to accept review of that case. We will learn a lot by whether the Supreme Court, one, accepts review of the case, and if they do, obviously we will learn even more when we get a Supreme Court opinion on whether Donald Trump can basically run roughshod over a co-equal branch of government, the legislative branch, Congress, because it is only Congress that can create a federal government agency, that can terminate, dismantle, shutter a federal government agency, and that can fund or defund an existing federal government agency. So, Brian, let's hope that if the Supreme Court takes review of that case, they get it right.
And finally, Glenn, I want to ask about the fact that Trump has lost so much in court. Do losses beget more losses? And I want to drill into what I mean by that. Have DOJ lawyers lost so much credibility in these courtrooms that whereas they used to be able to come in and they have the full faith and credit of the United States behind them, the United States government behind them, now, because they have lost so many cases, because so many judges can see that they're so willing to lie, so many judges can see the extent to which they're willing to pervert the law, manipulate the law, misstate the law, and so many judges can see that other judges have already ruled against them, does that create an atmospheric environment wherein subsequent judges are more predisposed to deliver losses to this administration because they know that they have kind of created a reputation for themselves to not be trusted in the courtroom?
Brian, that's such a great question because our common sense tells us that losses beget more losses. However, here's what I'm going to say. First of all, judges will look at each case on the four corners of that case with respect to the evidence, the facts, the law, and the Constitution, without regard to the fact that Trump may have lost any number of other cases kind of in the run-up to that case. However, now I'm going to mix criminal apples and civil case oranges for just a minute. When somebody is a repeat offender, they get convicted in court over and over and over again, albeit in separate cases for committing separate crimes. Guess what? Sometimes that whole history of criminal convictions becomes relevant evidence in the next case that is brought against that person. Relevant evidence both at the trial stage when a jury is trying to decide guilt or not guilty. I never say guilt or innocence because juries don't proclaim or pronounce innocence. They say you're either guilty or you're not guilty. And it also becomes relevant in the sentencing phase. What should be done to this person now that we know they've engaged in further misconduct in the context of a civil case or crime in the context of a criminal case? So I do think in a lot of ways, losses beget more losses. And I do think the judiciary's goodwill that they love to extend to the federal government, they love to extend to the executive branch, will wear thin.
Yeah. Well, we will, of course, stay on top of more what I'm sure will be bad days for Donald Trump in court. Perhaps not 4 losses in one day level bad, but I'm sure that we have many more losses on the horizon that we'll stay on top of, including that one case that we were just speaking about, the fact that the Department of Education dismantling will eventually head on its way to the Supreme Court. So for those who are watching right now, if you'd like to stay on top of these stories and any other legal news, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. It's the best way to support our work and the best way to support independent media more broadly. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.